Hello and welcome to our 7-8 minutes of weekly Torah talk. Our guest today is Rabbi Jack Paskoff. He is from congregation Sharei Shamayim in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Hello, Rabbi. Thank you for being with us.
It's my pleasure and my honor. Thank you.
Our parsha is Tetzaveh, and just a brief on the parsha. In this parsha, God tells Moses to receive from the people of Israel pure olive oil to feed the menorah, which Aaron is to kindle each day. The priestly garments to be worn by the Kohanim, by the priests, while serving in the sanctuary are described in detail. Tetzaveh also includes God's detailed instructions for the 7-day initiation of Aaron and his 4 sons, Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, and Itamar, into the priesthood. The first pasuk of our parsha says, "Ve'ata tetzaveh et bnei Yisrael v'yikchu elecha shemen zayit zach katit lamaor le'alot ner tamid." And you shall command the children of Israel, and they shall take to you pure olive oil crushed for lighting, to kindle the lamps continually. So, Rabbi, let's talk about garments. In last week's parsha, we were talking about furniture, the table, the ark, and all the other features that we have in the sanctuary. And this week we are moving to the things that the priest must wear. One wonders, why do we need all these features, items, when all we want to do is worship God?
It's interesting. I look at my own upbringing. I've lived my whole life in the world of Reform Judaism. When I was a child, Reform Judaism had a lot of pageantry. The rabbis all wore robes. The music was heavy with organ sounds, and it was listening to music that was operatic. It wasn't participatory music. It was filled with all kinds of pageantry and ritual. As I got older, as a teenager, and got involved in youth movements and Jewish summer camping,
Right.
We rejected all of that. We recognized that we can sit outside, put on a talit, and pray wearing shorts and a t-shirt.
Right. So now, when you're 29, you feel that participatory service is more fitting.
Absolutely, and that whether it's furniture prescribed in gold and bronze and silver, or clothing that is set someone apart so uniquely. What's the need for that? What does that do for us? Does it do anything, or does it create distance? And I think we come up with different answers to that at different points in our history. There are times when we like the pageantry, when we find some meaning in it. But more and more, I think the Jewish world is saying we want to be able to participate. It's no longer about that priesthood where priests do something for us. It's the rabbinate where we do things for ourselves with rabbis teaching us and guiding us. But we go out of our way to express that sense of democracy. So the question then becomes, what was needed back in the days of the Torah?
Right.
Why were people needing and requiring all of this? We find out a little bit of this next week when we get to the golden calf. And the question then becomes, these Jews are obviously too new at this idea of an invisible, theoretical God. They need physical manifestations. We need something that we can look at. And so even though it's not chronologically logical,
Right.
The rabbis tell us that building the Mishkan was an answer to the golden calf. It provided us with our tangible space. It created all kinds of other theological problems.
Of course.
Last week, God says, build me a sanctuary so that I can dwell among you. And in this week's Parashat, it says, for sure, God is going to dwell among us. They weren't asking the theological question, what does it mean for God to be limited to a space?
Or to be filling the
But back then
space in
seems-
such way, right?
But this week it says that message was fulfilled. God is living among us. So I think the critical question is not so much last week about the furniture or this week about the clothing. The critical question is, what does it mean for God to dwell among us? Where do we find God dwelling among us? And how do we worship that God in a sense of community that is provided for in our faith?
Right. I think you used the word distance. And maybe at some point, people do need the distance to feel the awe and the fear that we want them to feel. We know that kings wear special garments and have palaces. So maybe in the same fashion, this is what we also need for a God.
When I look at my childhood rabbi, who was someone whom I admired tremendously, he was very big on ritual and very big on garb. Even as B'nai Mitzvah, we wore robes for our B'nai Mitzvah services. He didn't even just wear a kippah, he wore a mitre. It was high drama. While he inspired me, I've definitely turned to a place where I don't wear a robe. I would never consider wearing a mitre. I would never have called my rabbi by his first name. Most of my congregants call me by my first name. It's what I prefer and expect. The question is, what is lost? Is there a sense of respect? And I'm not talking about for me here. Is there a sense of respect for our tradition, for our Sifrei Torah, for our worship places that is diminished when we reduce that distance? So how do we find a healthy balance that says this should be awe-inspiring, but not to the extent that it drives people away?
Right. Well, we do have the bima in most synagogues and temples, and we have the ark. So there are still a few features that we do keep even in this day of egalitarian services.
It's for sure, you're absolutely correct. Even there, something that I first started doing as a teenager that my rabbi never would have done. On Simchat Torah, like a lot of synagogues, we take one of our Sifrei Torah, we all stand in a big circle and we open the scroll around the whole room. Everyone has a chance to hold on to it, to hold on to a piece of it. So even something like a Sefer Torah, the distance isn't what it once was. I don't necessarily feel that the respect has been diminished. The mystery may have been diminished in some way, but if anything, I think seeing it up close and personal like that inspires a deeper sense of awe than just this object that a select person got to manipulate and maneuver within the congregational space.
Does this also mean that a person who isn't a priest nor a rabbi has more responsibility as a participator in ritual and in service?
I tell my folks in the congregation all the time, I'm a teacher. There are times where they would like me to be more. They would like me to visit the sick for them. There are certain mitzvot that they would like me to do on their behalf. But I want to facilitate the process for them. I want them to sense that proximity, to feel that connection. And so that's my goal. That's what I try to facilitate in my congregation. It's not a matter of lineage. It's not a matter of how much they know. I want them to feel connected. I want them to feel inspired. I want them to feel empowered. Those are my biggest goals, probably.
So how do we find meaning when we read all the details about the garments? This is an ancient text, and in most ways it is no longer relevant. We don't have a tabernacle, we don't have a temple, we don't have priests, we don't have garments, and from what you say, we don't even aspire to have special garments anymore. So where do we find meaning in such text?
I think we're sometimes too quick to dismiss texts like this, if for no other reason than for studying history, to get an anthropological sense of where our people came from, what their needs were at a given time, what the needs might be at some point in the future, not because I necessarily foresee the building of a third temple, but there may come a time when we feel the need for more ceremony and more ritual. One of my teachers in school was Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman, who wrote a book called The Art of Public Prayer. And he looks at Jewish history, and among other things, he says there are times where essentially, to mix our religions a little bit, essentially we built cathedrals. And there are other times where we built shtiblach. And each one reflects a very different need for a congregation at different times in history, facing different sets of realities. So I don't want to negate the experience of Jews who lived 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. I want to see the possibility for our experience today to find its own manifestation, but to preserve that which existed before, that which inspired generations that came well before ours, and to see the richness that offered as well.
Rabbi, this was a wonderful answer. Thank you, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thanks so much.